Just add love. Stop one so serious. Just add love. A little more lenience. Just add love. The key ingredient.
All right, we are on. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
It's great to be here, mate.
So you just came from Rihla. Tell us about Rihla. It's something I've wanted to go to for quite a long time. Never had the chance or opportunity. It's probably one of those things that you never have the chance or opportunity, but you know, it's probably better to take the leap and go when you can.
Definitely.
So you'd have people from all over the world, people who have spent their life studying community and religion, and so what are some of like the ideas that came out of or tell me the setup of Rihla. How does it work?
Not a problem.
For those that don't know.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا وحبيبنا محمد الفاتح لما أخلق والقاتم لما سبق ناصر الحق بالحق والهادي إلى صراطك المستقيم. First of all, Jazakallah khair for having me on.
Thank you for
it's an absolute pleasure to be on here. Just in regards to the Rihla, it's, you know, I've been a big advocate of Rihla for a very long time, and I've been volunteering for the past 3 or 4 years now, and it's something that I always recommend friends to go to. It's such an absolute amazing program. It's a 3-week program. For those who don't know, that brings together some of the leading scholars around the world, and every year kind of changes who comes along, but generally on the scholars list is the likes of Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad. Unfortunately he wasn't able to make it this year. Imam Zayd Shakir. This year we had Dr. Wan, who's a student of Sayyid Naqib al-Attas, who those who don't know who Sayyid Naqib al-Attas is, you should go definitely research who he is. Probably one of the, I would say, greatest philosophers of our time in the Muslim world. An absolute amazing thinker. We had the great pleasure of meeting him. He's 88 years old at the moment. We had the opportunity to study with Sheikh Faraz Khan, who's part of the teaching staff of Zaytuna, Sheikh Muhammad Qureshi, and the list goes on. I think we had about 13 people come from over 13 different countries this year. Generally Australia, US, UK. We had a lot of Aussies representing this year, which was quite amazing. People coming from Morocco, coming from Palestine. We have people coming, like a lot of local students from Malaysia. And what generally the Rihla does is, you know, really focuses on the Fard al-Ain in the beginning. You know, understanding who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is through the study of theology and a bit of logic. And then once students grasp the understanding of that, we go into the subject. Now you know who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. Now how do you worship Allah? And that's through the fiqh. And so we divide the classes into Maliki, Shafi'i, Hanafi fiqh. Unfortunately, no Hanbalis. And then after that, we go through different classes throughout that 3-week period. So this year we studied Islamic philosophy with Sheikh Muhammad Qureshi, spiritual cultivation. We did a tafsir class of the last 10 surahs. So it was really dense this year in terms of topic. But one of the reasons why it's done over a 3-week period, some studies show, you know, to really change a habit, it takes 21 days. Some say 40 days. Actually, the Rihla in the early days was 40 days. Damn, but it was very hard for students.
To take so much time off and stuff.
So it's been condensed into 3 weeks now. And one of the beautiful things about those 3 weeks, subhanAllah, is it really shows you what you're capable of. Just like how Ramadan has shows you what you're capable of, like the extra salat you do in nawafil prayers. This shows you what you're capable of in a very different way in terms of in terms of what you're able to gain in terms of in that short period of time, your understanding, your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the knowledge you're able to kind of comprehend and understand. And one of the things that, conversations I have with friends at times, and if I bring it back home, is that when it comes to Islamic studies, a lot of the times we're like, let's just kind of dumb it down, or let's make it basic so people don't get overwhelmed.
Yeah.
But we don't do that with other subjects. Like when you go to school, we expect people to
take it as it is.
Yeah, to catch up or either get left behind.
Sure. Yeah.
So studying biology, physics, mathematics, you're expected to
excel or
exactly.
yeah.
But when it comes to Islam, it's like, all right, let's just bring it down a notch. And so these 3 weeks when you're studying like things like Islamic philosophy, where people are, hang on, we have Islamic philosophy, spiritual cultivation, and all kinds of other subjects, logic, and theology. It's, for a lot of students, it's very overwhelming, just understanding the depth of our tradition. One of the subjects also with Ustad Miriam Shabani, we went through the Hadith interpretive tradition, and just going through what scholars would essentially, all the things that they would take into account when coming up with a fatwa or looking at hadiths, for example. And I think a lot of times back in the days when we would have conversations about hadith, or someone would say, oh bro, that's a weak hadith.
Yep.
Right. And we don't really understand what we mean by that. We just throw some of those terms around, like that's a da'if hadith, that's a weak hadith. But hang on, a lot of our scholars would actually take da'if or weak hadith into consideration, right? And just going through how vast and how deep our tradition is.
Yeah.
For a lot of students, it was beautiful. It was such a beautiful experience for them, and they walked away with so much. One story that I always mention to, I was a student mentor this year, and one of the stories I was mentioning to students beforehand is I always love listening to students' reflections at the end of the programs. So in 2017, I was reading a reflection from 2016, and this one sister described the rihla as being in her mother's womb, and I was like, her mother's womb? That's a bit too much, right? Yeah. And she went on to describe it like, she just felt so safe. The source of, there's a lot of mercy descending upon her. And she just felt, stress-free and just felt so comfortable for the first time in her life.
Despite the intensity of the
program. Right. Because there's so many other things that also go on. Like we're also doing, recitation of Surah Yasin in the morning collectively. We do our wird together, the wird of Imam Nawawi. After Isha, we're reading Surah Al-Waqi'ah. After Maghrib, we're reading Surah Al-Waqi'ah, and after Isha, Surah Al-Mulk, and then we'll sing some qasidas collectively together. So there is other spiritual nature to it as well. So one student actually was reading that reflection of that sister describing it as being her mother's womb, and he looked at it as like, Malik, bro, I think that's a bit too much, bro. That's too far-fetched, right?
But it's almost, it's poetic almost.
It's poetic, but
that's how she would describe like you said, the safety, the security, almost that fitra.
Yeah, exactly.
That natural.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then this brother, this was at the beginning of the program.
Yeah.
At the end of the program, the brother came up to me. He's like, bro, I knew exactly what she meant by that.
Right. It's almost like an experiential thing, right?
Absolutely.
It's like someone describes something and you're like, I don't know if it's going to be like that. But then you experience that and you're like, okay, I get you now.
SubhanAllah. And he was like, bro, I know exactly what she meant by that. Right. And so even leaving the rihla is probably the most difficult thing for a lot of students. Yeah. Even for a lot of brothers, I tell some of the brothers, mate, I know you're going to be one of those that ugly cry at the end of this. It's like, no, man, I'm not going to be crying. And then at the end,
ugly
brothers,
crying.
Brothers in tears. Yeah. So the sisters are in tears. And I think one of the biggest questions a lot of times that students ask, and one of the things I shared with them was, people are always scared about coming back after an experience like that.
That was going to be my next question. How do people deal with being in such a different circumstance than they're normally in, and then return to, work and family and reality, basically, when we're like, okay, this is, because I had a friend who, spent a lot of time studying overseas, and then he kind of almost forgot life here and was there for almost 9 or 10 years.
Wow.
Until his teachers there go, okay, it's time to go back.
Okay.
He's like, what do you mean? Time to go back. And he's like, you've studied here long enough. Like, you have enough now to take back to your communities, because your responsibility is to pass on what you've learned. And it was like a massive shock for him, because I don't think he wanted to come back. So how do, in your experience being a student mentor, how do you deal with that, like leaving that place to come to almost reality, and then also how do you figure out ways to implement the things that we've learned?
I'm actually happy you used the word reality, because I was going to actually share a story, a similar experience. We went on Umrah with Sheikh Hamza, and a brother, and I shared this story actually this year with the students. A brother looked at Sheikh Hamza and he was like, we were doing classes in Medina with Sheikh Hamza, and you're also there. Another layer to that is you're there with the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And so your man's like peaking, like you're like on top of the world when you're in a space like that. And he asked Sheikh Hamza, how do you maintain this? Like, this is what I've been searching for all my life, like this sweetness of Iman that, we hear of, the teachers speak of, but I got to experience this. Like really experience this. But how do I go back to reality and like maintain this? Like, I want to maintain this. And Sheikh Hamza smiled at him. He's like, you're not going back to reality. This is your reality. And what he meant by that, like if you really understood, and what I told the students as well at Rihla was, when you're at the Rihla or you're in spaces like this, that you have prioritized Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam all those weeks, right? So that was your reality. The reason that you're experiencing this is because in these 3 weeks you have prioritized Allah and the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and everything else was secondary. Nothing else really mattered at that moment. And so when you go back to your home, regardless of what you're doing, whether you're at work, whether you're at home, whatever you may be doing, as long as you're prioritizing Allah and the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, wherever you may be,
that becomes your reality, that beauty,
right?
So it's about transforming
100%
the life, your quote unquote reality. Now it's quote unquote reality, into that reality, the real reality.
And so that's how you essentially maintain that, because these things are like, I would say, you go into an intensive ward or a hospital, and you're being taken care of by these spiritual doctors essentially, and you're giving the right dosage of what you need in terms of reshaping, and a lot of unlearning occurs, just in terms of how unlearning occurs in terms of how you understand who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. And that is probably one of the most liberating moments, when a student sits there and studies Aqidah formally, because what our teachers explain to us is, when you study Aqidah, it's just not, these are the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, these are the attributes of the prophets, and the angels, and the day of judgment, but it's beyond that, right? Because the Prophet, so
that's a very basic understanding.
It's a very basic understanding. It's beyond that. It's really smashing all the doubts that you've been carrying, your entire life, and organizing your thoughts in how you understand who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. And our teachers mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ didn't come as a person to teach theology specifically. He was a person that was experiencing theology, right? And he was experiencing Allah. And so that entire process of understanding who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is an experience. And so when you go through those attributes, it's something that needs to resonate, right? And a lot of students come out crying in tears, and that, and if you even break down the word aqidah, for example, it means to tie a knot, right? and it's a knot of what? A knot of certainty. And so you walk out there,
Right.
when you walk out of those
tight knot.
classes, a really tight knot between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like, you have a proper understanding of Allah. And I'll give you an example as well. Like, I remember I was in Jordan and I had a friend of mine give me a call. And I think this is probably one of the most important knowledge today that we need to revive in our community and to teach it to the masses properly. Because a lot of this, like the theology that we study, like if you go to Mauritania or any other place, you know, some of the texts that we were studying were taught to like 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds.
Yeah, you realize how out of our depth, like how far behind we are.
So far behind, right?
Yeah.
So I remember I was in Jordan and a friend of mine called me. He lives in, actually I won't mention where he lives. He's like, bro, I'm thinking about leaving Islam.
Mm.
And I was taken back by it. And I'm like, why? He's like, bro, I have all these doubts about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Who created God?
Mm.
Why has God created all this suffering in the world? You know, it's all these negative, you know, doubts that come into my mind. And he goes, I just can't shake it off. And I try to approach some of my Quran teachers or the madrasa that I go to, and the teachers will like just push me aside and say, you're not supposed to ask those kind of questions. And he said in a way that he was just like he really wanted to believe.
Yeah.
And he really was fighting it. Like
It's almost painful.
It was painful.
Yeah.
And he was saying in a way that I don't want to leave Islam, but nobody's giving me answers.
Yeah.
And I was just like, subhanAllah, bro.
It's a hard place to be.
Yeah, it's a hard place to be. And I'm like, you know what, bro? I've had those doubts in my, you know. But when you have doubts, you have to seek redress for it. And so I was like, you know, I'm here in Jordan, and I found one of my teachers, and I wanted to study Arabic with him when I first met him. And the first question he asked me was like, Malik, you know, you've come here to study Arabic, but do you know your Aqidah? And I'm like, yeah, I studied it, but not to the level that I want. He goes, how can I teach you Arabic if your relationship with Allah, you feel as if it's kind of shaky? And I'm like, all right, bismillah, let's study Aqidah. Then he's like, how can I teach you Aqidah if the tools for you to access Aqidah you don't have? I'm like, what is that? He goes,
Arabic?
Logic.
Oh, logic, okay.
Right. Because he's like, you need to understand some of the universal principles, right? Because once you go into Aqidah or, you know, you're going through different types of prepositions based on, you know, empirical, based on the mind, the ration, and based on, you know, some of the shari'i, the legal texts that we have. But you have to understand, he's like, you know, the universals.
You're right.
Because that's where we're all going to start. Like, if you're talking to a non-Muslim, how can you start going to the particulars of the Quran?
Yeah.
Right, when they don't actually
it's not established, right?
It's not even established.
That's one of the things I think about when it comes to atheism or agnosticism, is that it's difficult because it's almost like the mind has already been made up, or you're assuming certain things. Like you look at something like science and go, okay, 1, 2, and 3 because of X, Y, and Z, but there's no underlying belief system.
Absolutely.
And that's why it looks, you know, like there's that there's an image that I saw. It's like there's a 6 drawn in the sand, and then but from where you're standing, it looks like a 9. So if we're not on the same page, then it's difficult for us to talk about anything really. Like, not only are we not on the same page, but we're reading different books.
Absolutely.
So then how can we really have a conversation? And that's one of the reasons even why I started the podcast, was because I felt like through conversation we can come to a mutual understanding and see things from so many different perspectives, because I don't have to agree with everything that you agree with. But if I understand it at the very minimum, then I can, then maybe I can talk to you on a more even ground, if that makes sense.
I remember Sheikh Anthony Andrews was saying to us in class, you know, for a Muslim, when we look around the world everything around us. It's a proof that God exists.
Yeah.
For an atheist, it's a proof that God doesn't exist.
Right.
So it's obviously definitely like the lens that
Yeah.
you're looking at things, and like the training or all the different knowledge base that you have that helps you come to these conclusions. But I think what logic does is kind of allows you to remove all the like logical fallacies or things that just don't add up.
Yeah.
And so he said to me, how can I teach you Aqidah if you don't know the tools to access Aqidah, theology? I'm like, all right, bismillah. Let's do it.
All right.
I'm here to learn that.
Yeah.
And so we went through that. Went through logic and then went through Aqidah. And it was probably the most amazing, program I've ever personally gone through. And I was explaining this to him. And so his thing was, the brother that was thinking about leaving Islam, is that Islam doesn't have a space for critical thinking and that we inherit the religion of our fathers and we're not supposed to question things. I'm like, absolutely not.
Islam doesn't have a space for critical thinking.
We just inherit the religion of our fathers.
Right.
Right.
Is this what he's told?
This is what he believes, and I think the madrasa system that he was a part of just pretty much reiterated that through you can't ask these questions.
Yeah. You're not supposed to think that way. You're not supposed to.
We just memorize the Quran, and that's it. And if you want to know Aqidah, Qul Huwallahu Ahad, Allahu Samad,
and that's absolute basic.
Right?
Yeah.
And I was explaining all this to him, and we went through. I got thrown me a question. Is like, all right, who created God? And I went through infinite regress with him.
Yeah.
And explained that concept to him, and just the weight of the world just lifted off him. And he's like, bro, nobody has ever explained it like this to me. And he's like, I've got a lot of reading to do, and like you've just opened my eyes, to so many things that I never knew existed in our tradition. And this is just like one example of what theology, for example, could do. And like I can guarantee a lot of students. One student, for example, I asked him, bro, how's things going? After a class of Aqidah. He was like, bro, I feel like I became a Muslim all over again. Right?
Yeah. Because once you... Like, we all think we know until we find out, right? Until we figure it out and then we know.
Yeah.
And then it's almost like we spend so much time thinking we understand, but there's so much out there that we don't.
Absolutely.
And then once we understand... Number one, we realize that we didn't know at one previous point in time. And then we also realize how little we know the more we learn.
Yeah.
It's kind of, it's a weird thing. But in my interactions in a lot of the community that I work with, and also just the community that I know, I can say that those doubts and that gentleman's experience is not isolated.
Absolutely.
There are so many people that do have those doubts and are afraid to even voice them. Like a lot of other things, like mental health, like
Absolutely.
a lot of things, because of the taboo.
Absolutely.
Okay? Now, I believe it's excellent to voice those things,
100%.
but I feel like it has to be done in the right place with the right people. Because also what can happen is if you're not in the right place or with the right people, sometimes the reaction from people can be very detrimental and exacerbate the problem. And
we actually have an example of this in our during the Prophet ﷺ's time. What you just said then, I think sometimes we overprivilege the now, thinking that what we're experiencing, people in the past didn't actually experience it. And so, and if you just look into the seerah, there was a man that came to the Prophet ﷺ, and he said, I have negative thoughts about Allah. And Ya Rasul, if I was to share it with you, I would rather to be reduced to dust or to charcoal. And this is the Rasul ﷺ, right? Like, we have countless examples of people who were just so comfortable with the Prophet ﷺ and would ask him any questions.
Yeah.
And like, we have an example of a young man who asked the Prophet ﷺ, give me, what's it called, the green light, essentially,
the
to
permission.
fornicate.
Yeah.
Right? And so, like, this is how comfortable people with. And what this shows us is our ulama and our teachers, we should be this comfortable with them as well. Like, and, you know, speaking our mind. But the Prophet ﷺ, when that person said, you know, I have negative thoughts about Allah, he goes, that is a sign of faith. Right? Imagine now, like, that man was living in this day and age. Right?
Yeah.
And he asked those
Hang
questions.
him.
All right? Get out of here, man.
Yeah. What do you mean? What do you mean?
And the Prophet said, this is a sign of Iman. And, like, imagine the weight that would just lift up your shoulders, right? And what did he mean by that? He's like, essentially, if you didn't have faith, like, or an appreciation, and you're not really, you know, trying to tackle this problem, the shaitan wouldn't be attacking this, right?
Yeah.
These thoughts, these seeds that have been planted in your head that you're struggling with, and you have the, alhamdulillah, the strength to voice it to the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and then the Rasul's being right there to, like, affirm for you that this is a sign of faith, that it's okay to have doubts, that's fine. Like, how liberating is that, man?
Yeah.
And then to be told, you know, it's a sign of faith, like, subhanallah, right? But what this shows us is, if you do have doubts, that you have to seek redress for it. Until you come to a point where you find the right person.
Yeah.
And the right space, you know, to address those doubts, you have to keep seeking it. And alhamdulillah, I think we're fortunate in our community with the likes of Sheikh Wissam, who's an amazing theologian.
Yeah.
You know, people.
We have access. I think
we have access.
I think one of the issues that our community faces is we might have a question. We don't have connections to these people that have the answers. That's the first thing, because there's so maybe there's so little of them. They're almost overwhelmed by the amount of work that needs to be done in their communities. So what they'll do, they'll jump online, they'll ask a friend, and then because of the amount of content that is out there, or a YouTube video that they heard, it's almost, this is the answer. I'll give an example to better explain my point. Something that changed my perception about ideas when I was very young. I had a friend who read a book, and it took maybe 3 weeks to read this book. A very dense book, full of ideas. Yeah. And I was like, oh, how was the book? And they go, oh, it's pretty shit. And I go, okay. And then that was it. Like, to be able to experience these ideas and then not agree with them, I think is something that's missing with a lot of people, because of us living in the 21st century, people are not exposed to that many ideas or that many concepts. Yeah. So it's almost what we take on, like what we hear, we take on immediately. Yeah. Whereas someone who's exposed to all of these ideas, they can almost become like a connoisseur of that and go, you know what? They're all great points. I don't agree with them for these reasons. Like, for me, it blew my mind that someone spent 3 weeks reading a book and then just go, yeah, I don't agree with most of it. It's like, like it's another idea. It's another concept. It's another... Yeah. So I think, in my experience, and a lot of people's experience who I've spoken to, that's kind of because of the content and, because of the way social media works, and we almost, this is what we take. And like you said earlier in the conversation, someone, that's a da'if hadith. Yeah. And there's a full stop. Yeah. Like, what do you mean that's a full stop? Like, if people who have spent their lives studying something, they're not putting a full stop after it. Exactly. Like, why is your world so absolute? Yeah. And it's almost like, again, going back to that, the more we know, the more we realize we don't know much.
That's half our deen. It
kills me why people are putting so many full stops. Like, why? Like, everyone, I don't care who it is, has had the experience at once in their life where they thought they were sure about something, and then they're not. Whether it was about an idea or a concept, or where I parked my car, or where I put my keys, or... No, I'm 100% on Thursday we were there. Yeah. Oh, but on Thursday we were here. Ah, right. Yeah. So everyone's had that moment. Yeah. So why are you so sure in your life that this idea is concrete, And some of the work that I've done with some of the Muslim community before, that was a big problem that I was coming across, was two things. Number one, that concrete concept of everything I know now is absolute.
Yeah.
And there's no other option that I could be wrong.
Yeah.
Just having that opens you up to accepting more. Because you don't think you know everything. That's the first thing. And the second thing was, I forgot the second thing.
But I think on your point, I think a big part of it, and I'll get back. I'll get to some of the work that we're doing with Mizan Avenue.
Yeah,
is there was a lack of just foundational knowledge, right? So if you're already standing on foundational grounds, like you're easy, like you can be swayed so easily, and you can agree with one moment and then agree to another one. But once you have a strong solid foundation, especially with Aqidah and fiqh, right, it's very hard to kind of sway you. And then you just accept the process and understand that there's been hundreds and hundreds of years that so many different scholars have, like the Shafi'i school, for example. It's just not Imam Shafi'i. There's hundreds and hundreds of scholars,
peers and students, and
contributed to the Shafi'i school, right? And so I'm like, who am I to say I'm not going to follow the madhab or whatever? And so I think when I talk about foundational knowledge, I think one of the things that we, growing up in the West, especially our early days, we would go to so many different kind of Thursday night talks, Friday night lectures, and this was just like information overload at times. It wasn't really knowledge.
It was motivational?
It was just motivational, or just like information that we're being thrown, like just to feel good stories, right? But it wasn't really ilm, right? That, if you look at how our deen has been taught for centuries, you're studying at the feet of a scholar, you're going through a text, you're working towards something, right? From we're talking, if you go to Mauritania till today, you can experience this. Like students as little as 5 years old will be sitting at the feet of a teacher and would memorize like poetry and poems of Aqidah and fiqh and all kinds of stuff. And that's really giving them a solid foundation, right? So we didn't have, I'll give you, like myself, the first time I actually studied Aqidah properly was at the age of 24, right?
Okay.
Right, and that's the first of all obligations. Awjib al-wajibat, like the first obligation is to know who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, right? And then you move on to all.
So it's almost like people are trying to build a house on a rubber foundation.
Exactly.
It's not made of cement.
Exactly.
And you're like wondering why this part's falling and this doesn't fit.
100%. And so, working towards, building these foundations for as a community is so important. And just building a generation of just confident young Muslims who know who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is and knows the fiqh. Once you study the fiqh, it removes all the guessing game. Like, do I read a Fatiha after the Shaykh reads a Fatiha? Do I read another surah after that? It just removes all that guessing game, right? And I firmly believe that's something that's really missing in our community in terms of just having strong foundations in these topics. And I think programs like the Rihla really does a great job in addressing that. And they've been doing it since 1996. SubhanAllah.
And are you always are there always new faces there? As well as
students?
Oh yeah.
As
well as the people who want to come back every year?
Yeah, absolutely. There's always new faces, and the beauty about it, SubhanAllah, the brotherhood and the sisterhood that are formed there is just incredible. And really reminds you, SubhanAllah, from the first day you walk in. I know this is going to sound cheesy, but
we like cheese.
But from the first day you walk in, your show is called addLove, right?
Right, maximum cheese.
So first day you walk in, SubhanAllah, I can't even explain it. Is everybody looks familiar to you. You haven't really met them before,
right?
But they look so familiar,
and they're from opposite ends of the world.
Opposite ends of the world, right? that's subhanallah, like it's something that you can't really explain. And I think the closest thing that I've come, like that tries to explain this, is I remember Imam Zayd mentioning that, you know, prior to coming to the earth, that when we stood there in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he said, Alastu bi rabbikum, and we all said, Bala, shahidna, like we all testified that all our souls had met prior to this world.
Right.
And those who were in the vicinity of one another, when they come into this earthly world, that there's some sort of recognition.
Familiarity.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, when you meet someone and, it's like, I've never met this person.
Exactly. And there's some that you meet and you're like, I'm like feeling bad energy.
Yeah.
But others, like, subhanAllah, you don't know what it is, your heart is just drawn to them. And I can say that, like, there wasn't a single person that I felt like wasn't familiar to me that was there. And a lot of people were experiencing that. And the amount of people that came up to me like, bro, I've seen you before. I'm like, no, you haven't. You live in,
mate, we're in Australia.
You live in Kenya, bro. So, I can't, you know, recommend it enough. So it's such an amazing experience.
So, like you said, a lot of people living in the West are missing this foundation knowledge, and you mentioned Mizan Avenue.
Yeah.
So tell us, I guess, how Mizan Avenue started. What was the thought process behind it?
Yeah, alhamdulillah. So I was living in Jordan for about a year, and then I moved to Egypt for 4 months.
Were you studying there? Or?
I was studying. And I came back actually for my brother's wedding in between my studies, and I had the vision of studying for quite some time, but family called me back. And it's all part of Allah's plan, right? Sheikh Hamza actually mentioned subhanAllah, something amazing at the Rihla this year, is that you can only live your life forward, but you can only understand that when you look back.
Right. It's
And
like a much more profound version of hindsight. It's 2020.
exactly. So you can connect the dots.
Yeah, after the fact.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I found my journey to go study overseas. I had quite a few profound moments that kind of led me to that moment, like where I made the decision to go and study. And that story I shared with you earlier, where Sheikh Hamza said, you know, this is your reality.
Yeah.
I felt, subhanAllah, like I wanted to do everything to make that my reality. And I knew the most important thing was to work on myself first and foremost in my relationship with Allah. So I took on the journey to go study. And so while I was there, alhamdulillah, like being exposed to so many different students from all around the world who came there to study. And also I'm kind of, you know, grasping my understanding of, you know, Arabic, of Aqidah and fiqh. I felt as if, you know, the way that they kind of structured some of the studies was what was missing in Sydney. And some of the doubts, you know, that a lot of us do carry in those conversations, subhanAllah, as Sheikh Hamza mentioned, you can only understand it when you look back, is I was also seeing from personal experience that a lot of people were carrying doubts about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yeah.
And that was purely because they haven't studied theology properly.
Yep.
And so when I came back and settled in Sydney, settled back, you know, I called together some of my dear friends and pretty much sold this vision that I had to them. And so this is what I want to do. I want to kind of bring teachers to the space where we really focus on this foundational knowledge. And also the other element was the suhbah, the companionship, which is so important. I think that's the second element at the Rihla, when you go there for the ilm, and then also you find the companionship that you've been seeking and looking for. Because the ultimate friendships are the friends that you look at and they remind you about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so we wanted to kind of create a space where it was a community of seekers, where people come together and learn and grow together. And that's what we were doing in Jordan. I had some of my closest friends that I met in Jordan. And we were there not only studying, we were having a good time.
Yeah.
We were studying.
Yeah.
You know, we'll go out, like, you know, to different maqams, visit the Blessed Tree, go out on the weekends to, you know, Wadiram, Petra, etc. We're having an amazing time. And our friendship and our brotherhood is growing. But at the same time, we're all dedicated, you know, to the knowledge.
Same goal and...
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And so that was the vision, to create a community of seekers, and that suhbah element, I think, is so important. One of the advice one of our teachers gave us was, after a retreat, was he said, you know, look for the spiritual termites in your life.
The spiritual termites.
Yeah, you're gonna like this one. So what does a termite do? It eats away the wood, but you don't realize it's happening, and all of a sudden you realize,
oh crap, I got a termite problem. Yeah.
The house has collapsed.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And the house is the iman. Right. And so you have these things that are eating away every single bit of iman that you've been working on. And
you don't know it's a problem,
you don't know it's happening
until it's not there.
Exactly. Until you realize you're back to square one. Right? You've been, you know, struggling, you've been praying, you've been doing all these things, but there's still a problem there. And he goes, 99% of the times it's the company that you keep that are the spiritual termites.
Right. And you realize that after the fact,
and then you
start connecting the dots, right?
So he said to look out for spiritual termites.
Spiritual termites.
Yeah.
And that's a concept, I think, in regards to friendship and the people you surround yourself with. It affects everything, 100%. Like your spirituality, your mental health, like the people. That's why I feel really, I'm not going to say sorry, but I feel, it's almost I feel sorry for people who are just in shitty situations and they're just surrounded with, not ugliness, they're just surrounded with, they don't have that positive community, or it may be there and they don't have access to it.
Absolutely.
And that's where some people are, you know, there are some people that write off social media completely and say, it's not a good thing.
Yeah.
There's too much negative that comes from it.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like social media isn't really changing anything. I feel like it's just amplifying what's already there.
Yeah.
So if someone is vain and someone is what's the word I'm looking for? Narcissistic.
Yeah.
Someone is vain and narcissistic. Their social media is going to be most likely vain and narcissistic.
Absolutely.
But if there's like nuggets of gold, then social media will amplify that.
Absolutely.
Another issue that I feel like is a problem is that we've also all been taught growing up to be very humble, right? Don't brag about the things that you do. You do them for the sake of God. It's all about the reward, and it's not about, you know, it's not about you.
Yeah.
So then what happens is these people almost have a tendency to remain quiet about the things, you know? Yeah. And actually that's where the concept of addLove as a whole, as a brand came about. Originally, like years and years ago, I had this idea of how do we celebrate the people that are doing amazing work that don't have it in them to advertise that.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't care. I'll have a conversation with anybody about anything. I have no problems. And then I'm happy to tell other people, like, look what this amazing person is doing. Even though in that time they're shy about it. They're like, no, don't, you know. But it's, if we don't celebrate that, then it's almost like that negativity will, you know, will overtake it. And that's the concept of addLove. It's like we're adding love to the world, you know, through conversation, through understanding, through celebration. Like, how do we bring this, how do we bring these amazing works forward?
And I think that's such an important part. And our deen speaks a lot about love. Right? And it's such a core concept to our tradition. What's the Prophet ﷺ's name? Habibullah. All right. Every community, like Isa alayhi salam was known as Ruhullah. You know, Ibrahim alayhi salam was known as Khalilullah, the dear friend of Allah. But also, like, the community that we're part of is the community of love. Right? And I think it's so important, like especially in this day and age, the amount of, you know, confusion that's out there, the amount of negativity that's out there, the darkness that's out there, that we do need to add love to the world, 100%. And it's part of a core principle. And I think even part of the work that we do at Mizan is, you know, the amount of loneliness that, like, people just feel lonely. They could be around, have 100,000 of followers.
Yeah.
They can still feel lonely. Right?
Yeah.
Or could be around hundreds of people, but still feel lonely.
Right.
The amount of people that I've had conversations with is that, you know, that moment where you come to a realization that this world is finite, and you realize, you know, I'm going to return to my creator one day, and, you know, you start making drastic changes in your life, but you feel as if you can't have conversations with anyone about what you're feeling
What's
spiritually
truly happening inside, right?
inside of you.
Yeah.
And you don't feel as if you can connect to anyone in that sense. Wallahi, the amount of people that I've come across is just amazing, right?
Same. It's
and they have that
it is a
spiritual
big problem,
awakening,
yeah.
right? And there is no space for them to explore that spirituality. And a big part of it, as I said, that the companionship is so important. And a lot of our work is really inspired by the work of, may Allah give him shifa, Osama Khan, right? And just the space that he created at addLove, come as you are,
yeah.
you know, to Islam as it is. And
It's based out of Chicago, yeah?
Yeah, no, in the Bay Area, in San Francisco.
Bay Area, yeah.
And that, even that quote, come as you are, you know, it's part of Maulana Rumi's quote, you know, come as you are, sinner. You know, if you've broken your vow 1,000 times, come again, come again. Right? And so for us, a test that Mizan is that anybody can come, right? Even if they come there by themselves, you know, that they feel comfortable. Like, you know, a lot of times when you go to gatherings, like, you want to go with friends and you're like self-conscious.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Otherwise it's awkward. It's awkward. Standing in a corner. Yeah.
So for us, like, a biggest test for us in terms of the work that we do is that someone can just walk in by himself and he feels comfortable. Right. And that we have, you know, the systems in place, or the suhbah in place to, like, you know, just bring people in, right?
I definitely experienced that a lot. Even though I would say a lot of the people that attend I've known previously, but I've met a lot of people there as well for the very first time that I didn't know elsewhere. And there are people that come to gatherings and classes at Mizan that normally wouldn't be considered, I guess, a part of the mainstream Muslim community in Sydney. And it's like, where are you from? I'm from Upuk, you know. And I heard or I saw on social media, or, you know, and that's why they're there. I guess that's a testament to what you guys are creating there and what's happening there. Is it's almost like a big magnet. And people are, even from a distance, being attracted to this space.
It's interesting you actually say that, like a magnet. You know, when I look at the ultimate suhbah, like the pinnacle of all suhbahs of friendship, is the friendship that the Prophet ﷺ had with his companions, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali, like, you know, the four, right? Like, that's the crew, the squad, the OGs, right? But they were a magnet. Like, people just would, like, just want to be there and gravitate towards them, right? And that gravitation was, like, for me, when I think about it, like the source of mercy, the source of rahmah, the source of understanding, wisdom, the source of, you know, clarity, right? And I think these are things that we want to be giving to people, just the clarity of understanding, you know, the Prophet ﷺ and understanding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And, like, once you kind of create, and this magnet is not something that comes from us, right? This is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Honestly, like, a lot of the work that we do, like, till today, I'm just gobsmacked, like, how much Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has been able to give us and facilitate for us. And that magnet is, you know, is from Allah. And just, I know friends who'll be listening to this are going to laugh because I mention this hadith quite often. Another hadith on love, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala truly loves someone. You know, he calls on Angel Jibril and he says, you know, I love so-and-so, so love him. All right. I'm throwing these love stuff because this is the program. Right? So he tells Jibril to love him.
Yeah.
And then Jibril goes to the people of heaven. And he says, Allah loves so-and-so. So love them.
Love him.
Or him or her.
Oh.
And so the people of heaven love that person. Or that community, or that group. And then that group will find love, acceptance on earth. And so then that's that source of rahmah that we're talking about.
Yeah.
That source of, that magnet. That's where it's coming from, bro. It's not coming from us.
Yeah.
It's coming from Allah. And so in the beginning, like for us, is like our intention, honestly, is just like we're doing this for Allah, regardless. Like this is, the real jihad of today, man.
How do you so a lot of organizations have really good intentions, have really good motives to start.
Yeah.
And like I don't think Mizan is at a point where there's like a crossroads by any means, but how do you have things in place to keep it from becoming something that it wasn't originally intended for?
Absolutely. I think, our reality has to be, rooted in, the context and the place that we're living in and everything that's happening around us and the experiences that we all bring to the table, and learning from the experiences of past organizations and current organizations and what we see in our communities, right? I think a massive topic 2017 when we were starting out was spiritual abuse in communities by scholars globally.
Yeah.
And so there is a number of things that we put in place from the get-go. One of the first things that we drew up as a team are the list of things that we're not. And I think it's very important because we overstretch ourselves as organizations where we want to be everything sometimes. And I think that's where the problem occurs.
It's almost that sometimes we see so many issues and we want to tackle and address all of them instead of focusing on this is the one thing we're so good at.
100%.
And we're going to... something I read recently was tend to the part of the garden that you can touch. So it's like picking that thing and doing it really well.
Yeah.
And that's your contribution
100%,
to
100%. And one of the things that we wrote is, in terms of things that we're not, was like, we're not a political organization.
Right.
We're not just a list of the things that
we're not.
And I think what you're saying, like, spot on. Like, I even reflect on the story of Imam Ghazali. And sometimes when you focus on what you are and you just focus on that, you do that well, the impact that is able to have is far greater. And those other things that you might be... I'm passionate about politics, right? When I see the injustices that are happening in our communities with our indigenous brothers and sisters, with our refugees, people come here, I'm passionate about that, but there are other avenues for me to work on it, right? But like in terms of this specific organization, our focus is very clear. And I'll give you an example. Imam Ghazali, rahimahullah, the Hujjat al-Islam, proof of Islam. He wrote the Ihya Ulumuddin, right? And the time that he was writing the Ihya, we had the issue of Palestine still happening. The Crusaders were there killing our brothers and sisters in Jerusalem. And they would say at that time that, the meat of our brothers and sisters at the time would be cut up into pieces and be made into a stew by the Crusaders. And we know for a fact that Imam Ghazali walked through Jerusalem and he saw these injustices happening. But not once did he ever call for a jihad. Right? Not once did he ever call for a jihad. But what he did was, he goes, I want to look at the root causes of our community, of the Muslim Ummah, which is why he wrote Ihya Ulumuddin, right, the revival of Islamic sciences. And he wrote about, Salah, for example. He felt as if people were just praying and it was all about the motions instead of being the motions. People were fasting, but it was a fasting of the tongue. And all these things have a metaphysical, impact, right? And this is not to just say, a lot of people kind of hate this type of politics, focusing on the self and then your family and then your community. But this is something that has worked, been tried and tested for generations. And so he wrote this 40-volume book. Less than 100 years later, you have the likes of Salahuddin Ayyubi. He walks into Jerusalem, conquers it, and he's only carrying 2 books, the Quran and the Hangout with him. All right. And so he might have called for jihad at that very moment, but he was calling for other types of jihad to take place within our hearts. Right. And to rectify our hearts and to prepare our hearts so we were able to kind of create an environment that allowed for someone like Salahuddin al-Ayyubi to flourish and for us to be behind him. Right.
So creating the environment in order for the type of people that we're looking for.
Absolutely.
That's our work. Absolutely. That's the work that we need to do.
And so when you have brothers and sisters who come to our spaces, we love the diversity is there. Not only in terms of people's backgrounds, but in terms of their professions.
Right.
Lawyers, businessmen,
nurses,
whatever. Right. People are engaging in politics, but giving them this spiritual kind of foundation that they can go out to the world and take this with them and be a guiding light with the work that they're doing, fighting the racism in our communities, fighting and standing up for the injustices that are occurring with our indigenous brothers and sisters. But they have this this pillar, inshallah, that they could lean on, that gives them that that spiritual energy to go out their days
and do their thing
and to do their thing
in the way that it should be done.
Absolutely.
That's super interesting.
And so coming back to what you were saying as well, and I've kind of gone off topic a little bit, but I was still on topic, is that another thing that we do is before every single meeting as a team collectively, we renew our intentions. And I think that's such an important part for any Muslim organization, because as you said, you have the initial goals or whatever, and sometimes you can veer off to something or become something else. But I think if you consistently remember to renew your intentions and never forget about those intentions, why you're here to begin with. In A'mal al-Niyat, that's the first hadith, in the 40 hadiths of Imam Nawawi. All actions is just judged by their intentions. And one of the commentaries I heard about this was that all you have real control over is your intention. In terms of your actions, Allah is in control of that. He can accept those intentions, but also what that means is, aim high, and
right.
If you pass away and your intention didn't come into fruition, you're going to get the reward.
You still get that reward, right? Yeah.
But what that means for an organization is that you're aligning yourself with Allah and saying, this is my real intention. This is why I'm doing this. But also, I think one of the other things is that our team members are all, alhamdulillah, bring a lot of strength to the team in terms of we have lawyers, people who business analysts, people who've been working in grassroots community work for many years, and they bring a lot to the table, and we have a board in that sense, and we take care of all the marketing, all the business side of things, and what we ask our teachers to do is what they're supposed to be doing.
Come and teach. And
I find a lot of times, it's unfair for the teachers to be doing everything on their own, to be doing the marketing, to be doing, the advertising of their classes, and then manage all the finances and all that. So,
we stretch them so thin that the thing that they're supposed to be doing and good at, they're unable to focus on that thing.
Exactly.
Because they're spreading their focus on too many other things. Yeah. I think that's a really interesting point as well. In my life, I've come across a lot of people who have said, I really want to learn. I really want to, dedicate my life to the deen. So then the automatic idea is almost that I have to stop what I'm doing or drop what I'm doing. Oh, I'm 3 out of 4 years out of this degree. Let's hypothetically say physiotherapy. Right? And it's almost this knee-jerk reaction of, oh no, I can't do this thing. I need to stop everything and then go and learn my religion or become a religious person. And, I think the right way to go about things is to understand that God put us where we're meant to be and gave us interests and strengths in different things.
Absolutely.
And for a community as a whole to run, everyone needs to be good at what
100%.
they do. So whether you're a doctor or a nurse or a mechanic or whatever it is, wherever it is that you've been put, I think it's super important for people to focus on that thing and become the best of that profession that they can. And through that, they can help the community.
Absolutely.
Like I met a young brother and he's super passionate about business and money. He's very good with money and all of this stuff. And I heard so many people telling him that business is not, materialism is not good and money isn't good. And it's like, it can be problematic, right? But then he came across someone that said, no, become the best damn business person that you can. And, I spoke to him maybe 6 months later about this specific thing. Like, how are your ideas going when it comes to business and stuff? And he said, I have an idea. And the idea is to create a successful business. And then when I do create that successful business, I'd like to hire refugees. So through that thing that he's super passionate about,
is no khair.
That's how you help people.
Absolutely.
How do I help the community as a doctor? You can have clinics, you can volunteer at places and doing checkups. How do I volunteer as a lawyer? You can help organizations that are, in need of legal advice or writing up contracts, or there's always a way that you can help and contribute to a community doing the thing that you love or doing the thing that you're really good at. I think that's super important for people to understand that you don't, learning Deen and Islam is not, there's no end. It's a journey. They say, enjoy the journey, don't worry about the destination. It's almost like this thing where no person can encapsulate it all.
Absolutely.
So pace yourself, because I think what happens as well in the community, like growing up, is a lot of people growing up in the West weren't taught properly how to handle living in a Western society and trying to come to terms with the religion that they're trying to live in this Western society. So they weren't given the foundations, they weren't given the tools to be able to handle that, And then what happens is they may live a life that they feel like is not pleasing to God. So that when they do have that spiritual awakening, they violently swing in the opposite direction.
Spot on.
It's like violently, like, oh no, this is the life I live. What's the opposite end of the spectrum? Like, how do I... It's almost... Like, I understand that. I don't agree with it. I understand that. It's like, how do I make up this debt to God? So then they are sucked into these super intense ideas without having that foundation, and they're trying so hard and so quickly to build this house on a foundation that doesn't exist.
Exactly.
It's like, bro,
take a deep
sis, breathe. Breathe.
Bro,
like intention, you said, like we know the story of, we have so many stories in our tradition of people who have intended something and have not even started to complete that task or started on that journey and have passed away and God has forgiven them. Or the man that had one good deed and he gave it away because it's only one deed. But because of that deed, someone else entered into heaven and then Allah says, you're not more merciful than I am. Both of you go to heaven. Like imagine, like you're putting a limit on God's mercy. You know, and I think it was a Rumi poem that I read once. It could have been a hadith. I don't know. I read this many years, maybe 10 years ago, but the concept stuck in my head.
Yeah.
And the concept was, you know, if you sin or if you do wrong as much as the foam in the ocean and you repent, and then you sin again or do wrong, you know, as much as the foam in the ocean and you repent, it's forgiven. Right? You're still alive. You still have breath. Breathe. Like that's the biggest message is just breathe. Because that's a major issue I feel like we have in our communities is that, you know, people may not have grown up in the right circumstances, or people have awakenings at different times. You know, there was someone asked, Sheikh Hamza was telling this story, and he said someone who was running a school in which they provided scholarships, and they said, how long do we keep a failing student on this scholarship before we go, all right, it's time to make space for someone else? He goes, 10 years. They go, oof, 10 years. So we keep this person who's failing for 10 years on, you know, and you know, what's the reasoning behind that? He said, because everyone has their awakening at different times. And we have different awakenings, right? We have maturity, we have even a spiritual awakening, even, he said, even a sexual awakening. Everyone experiences that at different times. And that comes from the upbringing they have, the society that they live in. There's so many factors that are contributing to this. Give people time. Because we don't know. Everyone has their awakenings at different times. We talked about Imam Ghazali. When did he have his awakening? And when did his awakening come? After what? After, you know, there's a time he's sitting at the back of the mosque, and at the front of the mosque, the teacher's saying, the great Imam Ghazali said. And he's sitting in the back of the mosque. Like, imagine your work was so spectacular and amazing that they're teaching it in your lifetime. Not afterwards, in your lifetime. You're sitting in the mosque that they're teaching your work. And the spiritual awakening came after. So, I guess the message is that I'm always trying to push forward is that just breathe. That's the first thing.
Absolutely.
There's no rush. I guess that, like you said, the intention is so important. And, you know, I met one guy once when I was traveling, and he said, you know, our life expectancy, say between 60 and 70 years. I want to spend the first 40 years learning Islam, and then the next 20 years teaching Islam, and then the last 10 years writing about Islam. He said, if I die any time in that time, like in between that time, inshallah, God rewards me for all of that, you know? Like just such a simple statement, but it's vision, right? Purpose, direction, and then once you have those, because when was the last time you got in a car and started driving and didn't have a destination? If we don't have the destination, you don't drive. If we as people don't have objectives and goals, then we have no drive.
Absolutely.
There's no direction. We're not going in, and that's where, you know, the conversations about being lost come in.
Absolutely.
It's like, why are we lost? It's because we don't really know where we're going, and we're just kind of just bouncing through every day. You know, another day, another dollar. That kind of. It's really
so much to unpack with all you said. But I'll start in terms of. This is one of my favorite, actually, quotes that speaks to what you were saying in terms of, you know, people who just want to do business, right? Or, like, Allah has opened the path for them in a specific thing. They have a desire to do something else completely different. But Allah has given them so much barakah, like, say, in business. But they will go off and go study their deen, for example, and they might not be the best person, and they'll have no barakah in their time, for example. And Allah give them barakah in their time with whatever they do. But understanding where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed you, understanding the talents that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you is so important, man, and giving shukr and thanks to Allah for everything, like the the talents He's given you. Right? And so Ibn Ata'illah, one of my favorite people in history, he's got his book of hikams, and in this hikam number 2, he says, your desire for isolation, even though God has put you in the world to gain a living, is a hidden passion. And your desire to gain a living in the world, even though God has put you in isolation, is a come down from lofty aspirations. So essentially, you know, Allah has given you so much opening in your business, right? And you could be serving so much khair in that.
Yeah.
But there's this hidden passion within, and you're like, no, I'm probably better off, you know, doing something else. Right? But Allah has given you talent, like, just give shukr for it.
Yeah.
Like, what's the verse from the Quran? You know, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you increase if you give thanks to Him. Right? So,
لَإِن شَكَرْتُمْ
لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ. So, one of the things that our tradition stresses on is being ibn al-waqt, a child of the time, to be in the moment. We think ahead, absolutely, you know, and we set the destination. But being present and being attuned to, you know, the gifts Allah has given you, all the blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you, right? And, you know, setting forth from there. And then, you know, you were talking about Imam Ghazali. You know, we know what Imam Ghazali has done in terms of the contribution he's done to the tradition, to our deen. You know, a man had a dream about Imam Ghazali, and subhanAllah, he was having a conversation with Imam Ghazali. He's like, you know, Imam Ghazali, what was it that allowed you to go to paradise? What action was it? Was the writings of the Ihya Ulumuddin? Was it the extra salats that you prayed? Was it...
What's the secret?
What is it? He goes, there was a moment in my life where I was writing and a fly was just on the tip of my pen, and I let it drink from the water that was next to me. And I just stayed still, and the fly was drinking the water. And he goes, that was the action that got me into Jannah.
Wow.
Right?
One of the giants.
Yes. That small action, right?
Yeah.
And so we're talking about spiritual awakenings, and sometimes we either feel, you know, paralyzed by the sins that we've committed, and, you know, we have all this debt, we have to make up all this time that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know, has given us, and we weren't doing it justice. That was part of your plan. You know, there's one of Ibn Ata'illah's hikams as well. He goes on to say that Allah opens the doors of, like, you know, you will commit sins so that He can open doors of khair. Right? So those doors, like those years of sin that you were in, was pretty much a breeding ground for you for this spiritual awakening. That you had to experience this darkness to, like, really understand this sweetness of faith. Right? And sometimes we rush it, we go to the opposite extreme. But as you were saying, like, take a breath, take a step back. Imam Ghazali also, I read this quote recently. I was just like, I actually was like, subhanallah. It was like, if you, like, and we're studying this in Aqidah, if you had control of will and power, you were able to choose your actions, and you were able to go back and change it as you see fit. You were able to plan your life and bring those actions into fruition as you see fit. So you're essentially playing the role of God. He goes, if you had power of that, he goes, you would realize you wouldn't change a single thing that Allah has planned for you in your life.
Wow.
You wouldn't change, because every single moment is leading to another. And then you can really understand, like, how many times can you look back in your life, right? And you're like, man, that was the darkest day of my life at that very moment. You know, I experienced loss, or might have experienced, you know, depression, whatever it was, and I just felt like I couldn't get out of that. And it was just like the darkest moment of my life. Fast forward 5 years later, you will look at it back and say, I needed that, and that was like the best thing that's ever happened to me.
That happens, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing with sins. Like, you look back at those sins and you can see what was happening. You can see God's plan.
Right.
Right. What you had planned for you all along.
I think it takes a specific trait to be able to recognize that, though. Because if it's not that it can't be learned, But I feel like if you're not reflective in that way, then there may be, I don't know, I'm just trying to think out loud.
Yeah.
Like if you don't have that trait of reflection, you know, look, in the community, you know, working in the community, I've come across so many people who have lived a very difficult life.
Yeah.
And let's hypothetically say at zero fault of that person.
Yeah.
They take that experience that they've had and turn it into a victim's card. Right? And there are some people who may have lived a more difficult life or experienced more difficult things, and through that reflection and contemplation have grown from that. And that's not to take away from anyone's experience and to say this is harder than that, or you know, this experience is harder than that experience, you know. But I think it takes work, and I don't think it comes easily or naturally to people.
Absolutely.
And it's definitely something that can be grown, not learned. I think grown is the word. Like through therapy and, you know, some of the therapeutic work I do with clients, I tell them that resilience is like a muscle that it needs to be exercised in order to become stronger. If someone has never experienced difficulty in their life, then it's very difficult for them to all of a sudden be this strong character and courageous. And in the same way with sin, it's like if we build this, if we spend time, we have to go out of your way. If you don't have it naturally, if you go out of your way and try and reflect, over time, the more that you do that thing, I think it'll become stronger.
I'll give you just what we learned here at Rehla. Specifically, and it talks about exactly what you're talking about. And it requires work, and it's just not something that's innate. And it requires personal struggle, right? And so this was milestones of spiritual purification, right?
Okay.
In terms of what you were talking about, in terms of, you know, we're all at different levels, and we're experiencing different things, and you can't get to a stage where, you know, you're okay with the difficulties and the trials and everything that you're going through, and you can see as God's plan and all that. It takes a type of training to get to that level, right? And so I think the first step, like in terms of this, is the most important thing, and even addLove also talks about this, is that, you know, sometimes we feel as if our actions don't match up to, you know, and we were talking about, you know, the debt. I feel like I've got years of, you know, sins, and, you know, I need to make up all that time. So, and then we base it based on our deeds. And that's our measure, like the deeds that we were able to do over the years.
Like we're comparing?
We're comparing.
Okay.
And so the first thing Ibn Ata'illah says, the first hikam he said a sign that you're just relying on your deeds is that you lose hope in God when you sleep.
When the sin is there.
When the sin is
right.
there. And then what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? O servant of mine. And the Prophet ﷺ said, when this verse came down, it was the happiest day of his life. O servant of mine who has transgressed himself. Like, you've committed sins. Like, you haven't done anything to Allah. It's like you've only transgressed
yourself. You've done it to yourself, right?
But he goes, even then, don't lose hope in me. Right? Because you committing that sin, the sin is, what's it called? You losing hope in Allah is greater than the sin that you've committed. Right? And so, regardless of what Ibn Ata'illah is telling us in that first hikam, is that regardless of how you sleep, you always maintain a good opinion and have hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Regardless of what pit hole or whatever, how dark it is, that you just have a hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
But that's so, like, it's beautiful, but it's so counterintuitive to what some people have been told and learned.
Exactly.
Oh, man.
Right. And then, obviously, you know, there's practical steps of, like, making tawbah for the actions or the sins that you've committed. And then for us, at times we need to instill like that hope is there, right? But we also kind of need to instill a bit of fear in terms of, so you don't return
That's
back
the balance,
to those,
right?
right?
The balance
Finding
of
that
fear and
Mizan,
hope, right.
that balance. And then he goes, you go to like this is just for like, you know, the early stage, and then you go to step 2, right? That you kind of develop this, you know, tawakkul in Allah. That this reliance on Allah, like now you're starting to accept and like you're starting to understand, you know, and you're having hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But then through that, and a period of time that you're living in that, you know, in that experience of like hope and forgiveness and instilling a bit of that fear, is that you develop this complete reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That you understand everything that's happening in your life is part and parcel of, this is part of God's plan.
It's part of your, the
God's
plan for you.
And then also taking control of your environment. And so isolating yourself from those negative energies, those things that are
Spiritual maggots.
those spiritual termites.
Termites.
You're coining your own term. Right? And then through that, you develop patience, sabr. Right? In the affliction or in the difficulty that you're facing. What is true sabr is when, like, what is true patience is when the trial afflicts you, that you're able to say alhamdulillah at the moment that it happens. Right.
في صدمة الأولى.
Ibn Nahawi in his Munfarija, in a poem, he talks about, you know, trials and tribulations, and the first thing that he talks about, the first line he says, you know, ask for an increase of the tribulation. I read that and I was like, what the hell, man? How do you ask an increase for the tribulation? Initially, I read it as you ask Allah for an increase, but it's not what he was saying. Is that you have a relationship with the difficulty itself, and you're asking it, because every difficulty that you face has a peak point.
Right. It has its, it has its peak. Yeah.
It has its peak, and
when
then
it's at its worst, and then
that's when the farija, like the relief comes. Right. Once I think he says in that a sign of dawn is the darkest point of the night.
Right.
Right. That's when dawn
because
breaks.
it's at its peak. It's the darkest, and then after that, right.
So every difficulty is gonna reach a peak point, and then that's when the relief comes. So he's like, you don't wait it out, just like go head on with the difficulty. Sheikh Hamza was actually telling us a story of when the tsunami, I think, hit Indonesia. A man was at the beach or at the ocean, and he looked straight at the tsunami, and he had his boat, and he was like, I could run or I can just face this head on. So the tsunami, he went to the air, and then he fell back like he was, and he survived.
Oh, yeah. He didn't capsize.
And he didn't capsize, and he survived.
Right.
So
but if he had started turning, maybe things would have been
exactly. Different. So he, what's it called? Just like he pretty much embodied that first line. He just went straight ahead, and alhamdulillah, he survived it. But with all difficulty, you know, having a relationship and being like, a lot of times you find people just kind of wait it out and just become passive with the difficulty that they're feeling, and, you know, not really working at it. Right. And then he talks about that stage, and then the final stage, once you go through all this, subhanAllah, like, it takes you to a point of shukr, that you're in complete thankfulness to Allah. You start to see how everything is playing out in your life, and you know, and the blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like, if you were just to count all the blessing that Allah has given you, like, now this is the positive affirmation. Like, we have that in our tradition, right? Positive affirmations. Right. You know, Steve Harvey, I remember watching a video of his on YouTube, and he goes, every morning he spends 10 minutes just giving thanks to God for every, you know, good or everything that he has. Right. And that's, again, لَإِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ. And he actually explained that, and he goes, how would God give me an increase or change my situation or give me an increase for what I have if I'm not thankful for what God has already given me? I'm like, bro, this guy is just like taking straight pointers from the
Repeat after me.
Right. But we say that, like, in our, like if you have a wird, like a daily kind of invocation in the morning,
Right.
there's a lot of, du'as that you read in the morning that you just give shukr. You give thanks, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, hamdan yuwafi ni'mahu yukafi mazid. Right. And giving thanks to Allah. So you get into a point where you become a shakir, like a person that it's in constant thankfulness to God. How could you not? There's a famous poem by Muhammad ibn Habib, Kam laka min ni'matin alayya. Ya Allah, how many blessings have you given me? Right. If you were just to count the blessings that we have right now, the health that you have. People pay millions and millions of dollars just to take your health, right?
That's right.
Just
give me a kidney.
Exactly. Right? So alhamdulillah for that. And so, you're giving shukr to Allah for all the ni'mah, all the blessings. And so Muhammad ibn Habib says, Kam laka min ni'matin alayya, Ya Allah, how many blessings you have given me. And I'm not worthy of that. I'm not worthy of all these blessings, but you still keep giving me, right? How many times have you just felt like, man, I'm not deserving of this? Like the health, the wealth, the family, the love, all the friends.
And then
all
even when we say alhamdulillah, like when we're thanking God, like we thank God for the ability to thank Him.
Exactly. Subhan.
Because
that in itself,
because that's a blessing, right?
That in itself is from Allah.
Yeah.
Right. The hamd that you're giving, that alhamdulillah, the thanks that you're giving is from Allah in itself as well, right? And then he says it leads to a point, and you have that shukr, a point of rida, contentment. And that's what we're all seeking, just to be fully content. That alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, we said that. رضيت بالله ربا وبالإسلام دينا وبسيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم نبيا ورسولا. That I am content with Allah as my Lord. I am content with the Rasul as my Prophet. And I'm content with Islam as my religion. That's part of one of the du'as in the Wurd al-Latif that we recite in the morning, right? And just that complete contentment. I remember I used to go to a chiropractor, and this lady did like traditional chiropractic. So no acupuncture.
Right.
And she was like, it's going to be the first time I saw her, she was like, it's going to be a 2-hour session. Yeah. And she's like, at the end of this, you're going to feel content. I'm like, what the hell are you smoking?
What's in these needles?
What's in these needles? I'm not about that life. Yeah. She said, like, you're going to feel content. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, content is like a spiritual state. It's not something that you can induce in me, right? She's like, you're going to feel content. I'm like, okay, let's see. So subhanAllah, after the 2-hour session, I felt so content. And it wasn't just a physical feeling, but I just felt like spiritually content. But I had a reference point for that contentment. And my reference point was like, and I was actually in tune with myself at the time. It was when I was surrounded by my teachers. When I was overseas and just being surrounded around the teachers where nothing really matters. Right. And I was just like in a state of contentment. Wallahi, like I was just like, this is where I want to be, and I want to be around the teachers, right?
So you had that point of reference
that was my
in
point
which
of
you
reference.
can go, okay, this is
what
similar
to
like. That.
This feeling feels like that. And then you're going to love this final point. And he goes, from that contentment, it leads to muhabba, love.
Wow.
So you're adding love.
Right. Wow.
And so these are the milestones, essentially, of spiritual purification.
So this is steps, almost like very practical steps.
Absolutely.
Like going through, it's almost like it reminds me. It's not similar, but it reminds me of the stages of grief. Like you go through this stuff, like you go through, the reasoning and the anger, and you have all of these steps, and then what's the final step? Is like the acceptance.
Yeah. And our acceptance is love.
Yeah.
Rabi al-Adawi, a great saint, subhanAllah, one of my favorite quotes, and some people can't fathom this. She said, Ya Allah, if I worship you to go to Jannah, deprive me from Jannah. If I worship you to stay away from hell, throw me in hell. But my true worship for you is my
From
love, my love for you.
Because that's your ultimate goal, right? You have Islam, Iman, Ihsan.
Absolutely.
Like your Ihsan is that, even in basic, I guess, Islamic knowledge, you learn. There's the 3 stages is like, we do this in order to stay away from hellfire. Then the second one is we do this to attain heaven. But then the third one is you do this because you love God.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think that's the kind of Islam that when you hear about it, that's like that's Islam.
That's the yeah.
Right. SubhanAllah.
Yeah.
And this is Islam that we need to share, and I think this is what's missing in you. MashaAllah, you're doing amazing work with this project, addLove, and I think that's essentially what is needed. That's the name.
I hope so. I hope we can provide.
That's the name of our Prophet Habibullah. And he came and he added love to this world, a world that at the time before he arrived was lacking love. And we need to share that. SubhanAllah.
100%. So tell people. I know you guys have an Instagram in which you are advertising all of your events and upcoming stuff. That's. Why don't you tell us?
Yeah, so if you want to stay up to date with Mizan Avenue, we've got an Instagram page. We do share a lot of quotes, insightful stories, and all of our programs and events are on our Instagram page and on our Facebook page as well. So you can stay up to date with everything on there, inshallah. So, yeah. Definitely.
If you guys are interested in anything that we've talked about today, head over to Mizan Avenue on Instagram and Facebook. Thank you very much, Malik.
It's been a
very, very awesome conversation, and we
really
look forward to having you back.
Enjoyed it. Jazakallah khair.
Yeah.